afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar presented by Dr. Jason Turner covering horse deworming and proper feed management. Before we begin today's webinar, I would like to thank our co-sponsors for this event, the Western Extension Risk Management Education Center and Dene Inc. for allowing the New Mexico NAPS 6 project to provide this opportunity for our producers to learn of programs in our area. The New Mexico Native American Producer Success Project, or NAPS 6 project in short, is a collaborative effort between Dene Inc., a nonprofit organization, the New Mexico Cooperative Extension Services, and Dene College Land Grant Office. So we currently have 2 projects operating in both New Mexico and Arizona. The New Mexico NAPS 6 field staff consists of myself, Jesse Jim, and Jana Johnson. The Arizona NAPS 7 field staff are Sadie Lister and Sharon Salmon. The project is funded by USDA's Office of Partnership and Public Engagement and the Outreach and Assistance for Socially Disadvantaged and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers program. The overall goal of the NAPS project is to increase the profitability and long-term sustainability of Navajo farmers and ranchers. To help us achieve this goal, there are some activities that we are currently providing in 4 key areas, which are to improve Navajo farm and ranch operations, increasing our Navajo farmers and ranchers' knowledge of and access to available programs and technical assistance provided by USDA, BIA, Navajo Nation, New Mexico Cooperative Extension Services, the Dene College Land Grant Office, and other professionals. We are also strengthening the organizational capacity of Navajo Farmer and Rancher Congress to address the current and future needs of Navajo farmers and ranchers, and facilitating Navajo farmers and ranchers' use of USDA programs such as NRCS, FSA, and RMA programs. So today's webinar, Equine Management, is being presented by New Mexico State University's Extension Horse Specialist, Dr. Jason Turner. The topics he will be covering, as I mentioned earlier, is horse deworming and proper feed management. Before we begin, I would like to have my colleague, Michael Patrick, from New Mexico State University, share a few words with us. Michael?
Yes, thank you very much, Jesse, and welcome, Dr. Turner. Thank you for finding time in your busy schedule. One would think under the current COVID restrictions that we might have more time than less because we don't travel as much, but certainly we find ways to fill up that time and more. So thank you, Dr. Turner. And New Mexico State Cooperative Extension Service is essentially our role is to provide technical support and other resources to the NAPS 6 and NAPS 7 projects in collaboration with Dene Inc., which is a nonprofit Arizona organization that has been working with Navajo farmers and ranchers for the past 15 years. So thank you again, Jason, and we're ready to go, Jesse.
Okay, that sounds good. So I'll go ahead and turn the screen over to you, Jason, and the floor.
Okay, now we're rolling with Zoom. It's always nice to relearn what we think we already learned about the technology, but again, I appreciate y'all having me on today. I know we've got a lot of things going on in our lives. Just like Michael said, we'd think we'd be a little more tied to home and maybe not as busy as we have been before, but I guess that's a blessing and a curse of technology that we can meet online to talk about things today, but yet we're still so busy that we have to make time to do it. So again, I appreciate y'all having me on today, and I just wanted to take a few minutes to discuss some basic horse care topics that we might be thinking about this time of year as we roll in from our summer and fall, getting ready to head into winter. And probably I haven't got to go up to the Navajo Nation in a while, but I expect you're like much of New Mexico and pretty drier than normal, and that always poses some problems for us. So I think I've got about 15, 16 slides for us today to kind of cover the basics of general horse care. And then I want to leave time at the end to take any questions that you all may have. So I'm probably not going to be able to work through the slides and do the chat all at the same time, but we will have time there at the end should you have questions, and we can go back and look at the slides. I know some of you are on the phone as well, just listening to the audio, so this may be something you want to go back and view the recording that Jesse is making. But the two general areas I wanted to talk about today are basic health evaluation. We're going to talk about a general overview of health and talk about normal vital signs and some routine healthcare practices. And then the other category is some basic points on nutrition and feeding our horses. Talk a little bit about body condition score, how we can use that, and tying in with feeding management, and then just having some good routine feeding practices that are going to help set good schedules for our horses. So this first slide I have here, for those of you on the phone, I've basically got a long, shaggy looking horse here that doesn't appear to be in too thrifty condition. And that's to illustrate the visual aspects of our basic evaluation of health. You know, we need to look at the behavior of the horse and know what is normal and abnormal for that horse. So if our horse is normally pretty spirited and running around the pasture or pen in the morning and got their ears up and their tail up over their back and having a good time, you know, we go out one day and they're droopy-eared and they're just standing in the corner and pretty lethargic or not wanting to do anything, you know, that may be a pretty good indicator that there's something going on health or injury wise or disease wise that we need to investigate further. So I always just like to have an idea how that horse looks and normally acts, and any deviations from that may be a red flag that we want to investigate further. Second point on here is hoof care. We want to look at the condition and quality of the horse's hooves and make sure there's no splits, major cracks, or there's a pointing lameness, or their gait may be off. Those are some other things we want to look at there. And like I said, with this horse in the picture, long shaggy hair coat, just looks to be a poor doer. We want to look at the quality of the horse's hair coat and then the underlying skin. You know, that's one of the things we need to be able to detect as well, if there is maybe some nutritional deficiencies that lead to that poor hair coat or skin coat, or perhaps there's some skin diseases. You know, we have some fungal diseases and some parasitic diseases that can predominantly affect the skin of the horse. And then the other thing we look at in our visual appraisal is the body condition score of the horse. Much like you've heard for beef cattle, we look at the body fat reserves on the horse on a 1 to 9 scale, and we'd like to see them somewhere in that 5 or 6 range or middle of the road. Certainly not too fat or not too thin where you can count their ribs or see their backbone. And we'll talk a little bit more about body condition scoring in a minute. As we move from the visual evaluation of health, you know, our next step in is kind of taking the vital signs, and that's what's represented on this slide, is just the normal vital sign ranges for an adult horse at rest. And so I've got those parameters listed up there in the green letters to just give you the normal ranges. And then down at the bottom, it says how-to video with a link. And when you have time to get on the internet, that link there will take you to about a 10-minute video that goes over all the process on how to take the vital signs of the horse. So that's probably more impactful than what we can do right now. But in terms of vital signs, the first three we look at are the same in the horse as humans. It's called TPR, or we want to look at the temperature, the pulse or the heart rate, and then the respiration rate, or how many breaths per minute. So again, putting these out there for the normal adult horse at rest. So if we had to run that horse around the barn lot to get him caught to take these measurements, then that's not going to be a good representation of a normal horse at rest, because we may have ran him around for 10 minutes to try and get him caught, and his heart rate and respiration rate is going to be up, his cortisol levels are going to be up, and so that's not a good approach. The other alternative is, maybe we had to run a group of horses in off the pasture, and we brought them up with the truck or on horseback or whatever. If they've been exercising immediately before we take these measurements, then that's not going to be ideal or representative. So if you do have to go gather horses to take their vital signs, you might want to let them rest, cool off, and just chill out for at least half hour before you go out there and take their vital signs, so that you're getting a normal representation. But our temperature, the normal temperature for a horse is 100.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and nowadays we can get these little digital electronic thermometers at the dollar store or maybe the pharmacy or whatever, pretty inexpensive. I know I buy several of them at the dollar store for about $1 a piece, and try and keep one at the barn and one in the truck and trailer, and they're pretty inexpensive and do a pretty good job. But that's a pretty good tool to measure our temperature, our pulse rate, and our respiration rate. Taking those will probably be where you want to watch the video, but the normal pulse rate is about 30 to 40 heartbeats per minute, and respiration is about 8 to 12 breaths per minute. The next two there on vital signs, the capillary refill time, that's basically where we take our thumb and just push in on the dental gums of the horse, or raise their lip, push in on the gums of their teeth, and press out the blood flow, and then count how long it takes for the blood flow or the pink color to come back. And on the normal horse, that's about 1 to 2 seconds. And the reason we use capillary refill time, that is our best indicator of how the circulatory system in the horse is working. And so that's our equivalent to when we go to the doctor's office or the dentist's office or whatever, and they put that blood pressure cuff on our arm and pump it up to get blood pressure. This is the analogy in the horse, or the equivalent in the horse, where we're trying to get an idea of their circulatory system. And then the last one there is the skin turgor test, or sometimes called the skin pinch test. And it's basically taking your thumb and forefinger and pulling up a fold of skin on the horse's neck and pulling up, making it tent, and then releasing it. And the normal time for that skin to go back into place and be smooth and flat and normal is about 1 to 2 seconds. And the reason we do that is a means of measuring dehydration in the horse. If that test takes longer than 1 or 2 seconds for that skin to go back to normal, it means that your horse is dehydrated, and we need to provide them some supplemental water and get their electrolyte balance corrected. Okay, so this slide here, I've got a lot of abbreviations and things on there. It's the American Association of Equine Practitioners Annual Vaccination Guide for Adults. So what kind of vaccines do we need to give our horses? And so really there's two big categories, and then kind of two subdivisions under that. So I'll start on the left-hand side of the slide is the viral category. So these are our viral diseases that affect horses that we want to vaccinate for. And so typically every spring prior to mosquito season in your part of the world, because that may vary a little bit around the state, we want to vaccinate horses against Eastern equine encephalomyelitis, Western equine encephalomyelitis, Venezuelan equine encephalomyelitis, and West Nile virus. And so collectively, all those together would be our quote unquote sleeping sickness disease and our West Nile virus. They all cause inflammation of the neurological system in the brain of the horse, and there's no good treatment for them. And they can be pretty lethal. So our best means of dealing with those viral neurological diseases are to prevent them through vaccination. So that's highly recommended every spring. Just under that are the risk-based viral vaccinations, and those would be trying to assess how much risk your horse is at for getting this disease. And most generally with horses, that's related to how much exposure they have to other horses outside their local community. So if you rodeo or run barrels or rope or the kids rope or whatever, and these horses are traveling a lot, then that's where their risk increases, and we would want to help prevent those diseases. And probably the two biggest one there to start with are equine herpes virus and influenza virus. Be at least annual or semi-annual, meaning 2 to 3 times a year in terms of administration. And a lot of times those are given along with the sleeping sickness vaccine all in one dose. But if you got horses you haul a lot and you're competing, if you're still traveling this time of year and they're going to be out on the road, I would highly recommend that you vaccinate your horse for herpes virus and influenza, just to kind of protect them as they travel. The second two viral diseases there, the next one is equine viral arteritis. It's not as common or prevalent as some of these others. We had an outbreak of this in New Mexico about 10 or 12 years ago in our racehorse populations. And that's really whenever we started thinking about vaccinating for this disease, because it can cause abortions in mares, and it is a chronic or long-term infection in stallions. And so if you are going to vaccinate horses for that, you need to coordinate it with your veterinarian, because they have to have a pre-vaccination negative test for the disease. And so that's one I wouldn't recommend commonly vaccinating for, but we just list it there because it is recommended by the AAEP for some stallions and mares. And then the last one there, risk-based vaccination, is rabies. And that's one of the things, you know, I would certainly recommend that you have your horses vaccinated for rabies at least every 1 to 3 years, kind of maybe along with the dog and cat population, because they're at risk just as much as those dogs and cats are by being infected by other wild animals. On the right side here, we have our bacterial diseases that we vaccinate for. And then probably the biggest one is tetanus, or Clostridium tetani, the one that causes lockjaw. Typically we use a toxoid preparation to vaccinate for that. And generally nowadays that's commonly included with our sleeping sickness vaccines. And so we don't have to worry too much about a separate vaccine for that. We just put it all in there together. And then other risk-based bacterial diseases, there's quite a few of those. So that would be something that you might want to look at this chart from the AAEP, or talk to your veterinarian and just get a little more thought about your risk there. And then at the bottom of the page is just a recommendation for brood mares. We always like to booster vaccinate our brood mares about 4 to 6 weeks prior to giving birth, just because that helps build the antibody immunity in the colostrum, or first milk of the mare. And it offers a lot of protection to those foals as they're nursing. And so that's just recommending giving those vaccinations to the brood mare at the proper time. Okay, next slide. For our horse health management organization, we're talking about deworming. So in terms of suggested deworming programs, this isn't as simple as it used to be, I don't think, because when I was growing up, even until the time I went to college about 20 or 30 years ago, we were just kind of told you wanted to deworm your horses every 2 to 3 months. That's the program. And so what we're seeing now, or the recommendation, is to consult with your veterinarian, because they can do a test, what's called a fecal egg count, where they look at the eggs of these parasites in the feces of the horse. And what they found over the time with research is some horses may not be deworming at all because they are highly resistant to parasites, whereas other horses may need deworming more frequently, and they tend to shed a lot more of these parasites in their feces. But veterinarians have become concerned because a lot of these parasites have become resistant to the dewormers that we're using nowadays. And so, like I said, back in the 1960s and 1970s, everybody was concerned about large strongyles or large bloodworms in horses. And that's when they developed all these paste dewormers that are very convenient to give, and then they recommend giving them every 2 months. And so what's happened is they've basically knocked out all of the large bloodworms in the equine population. And very rarely do you find those parasites, except maybe in some wild horse populations or horses that haven't been dewormed in a very, very long time. And so that has taken care of that problem we were concerned about in the 60s and 70s, but what they're worried about now are these parasites developing resistance to these chemicals we've used to get rid of them. And so veterinarians are recommending to back off deworming as much, and then trying to use components of the parasite life cycle in the management. So I've got another slide here. There's a lot to it, but I really just put the figures up here to let you know that when we give a dewormer to a horse, like at the top of the page here where we've got this tube with the dewormer, all we're doing is giving that chemical to break up the life cycle or the reproductive cycle of those parasites and to stop that proliferation of those parasite populations. This bottom picture down here with the text boxes, this is the actual life cycle and different stages of what's called small strongyles, or the small bloodworms in horses, which are the primary parasite of concern nowadays. The reason I share this with you is to let you know that there are certain stages of the parasite that live in the horse, and then there's certain stages of the parasite down here in the green that live on the pastures or the forage. And so some stages can be infective to the horse, whereas other stages are not able of living on the pastures and so on. And those are the things that we try to utilize in the management to help minimize our use of chemical dewormers. So one of the common misconceptions I found as I was investigating this a few years ago, when I was growing up, we were always told that the worms freeze to death in the cold winter temperatures, and they flourish in the summer temperatures when it's nice and warm. And a lot of the research I've looked at and found is in some cases the opposite. The summer months, our dry, hot summer climate in New Mexico is very harsh to the proliferation of parasites. And on the other end, a lot of these developing forms of parasites can tolerate cold temperatures very well. And so they just remain dormant until it warms up. And so that's something that we need to think about as well in developing our deworming programs. This slide here just shows some of the different chemical and brand names for our different products. You know, we've got ivermectin, moxidectin, bendazole, oxybendazole, and parenteral pamoate, and then all those brand names there. And so each one of those that I just mentioned are all a different chemical class of dewormer, and they act on the parasite differently. So to kind of pull all that together in something that you can hopefully take home and use, I put this slide together. And I just kind of, call it my holiday deworming schedule, because what I tell people, I'm bad about keeping records, but I know when the holidays are. My kids keep me reminded of when the holidays are. So if you look at the top right, I've got a little graphic there that shows Easter, July 4th, Labor Day, and Christmas. And then in the center, it just says annual deworming schedule. So kind of taking all this together, if we look at a hot southern climate, so let's say, Las Cruces, Deming, Socorro, something like that, a program that might work well for deworming adult horses there is maybe using ivermectin in September around Labor Day, and then in December around Christmas, perhaps using moxidectin or ivermectin to kill those parasites. And then in March or April around Easter time, we want to utilize a different chemical such as oxybendazole or fenbendazole to control those encysted small strongyles. And so that's something for a southern climate. For summer months in the south, the summer heat and dry temperature, or hot temperatures and dry heat, the environment is unfavorable to the development of those parasites. And so that's where we can save ourselves some money on dewormer and help prevent resistance just by maybe skipping deworming down south in the summer. But in our northern climates, the higher elevations and so on, where we've got some cooler summers and maybe some more moisture due to the mountain elevations, that may be in your situation. You might want to consider deworming once in the summer to control those small strongyles, and trying to do that around the 4th of July. And again, this is just a simple plan that revolves kind of around using the holidays, so you'll know when you did these things or management practices. But ultimately, I would recommend that you check in with your veterinarian and see what they recommend for your local area. Okay, last part of our horse HMO, the annual wellness exam. We want to make sure that we get our horses' teeth checked to see if they need to be floated, and just the graphics on this page show you some different examples of some teeth problems you may see in horses. But once horses get beyond about 8 years old, they probably need to have their teeth checked at least every 2 or 3 years. A veterinarian's probably going to recommend it every year. I say 8 years old and older. In some cases you might find horses younger than that would benefit from some dental treatment, but just some rules of thumb, once they start maturing, getting close to those teenage years, this is where you're going to need more frequent dental treatment on an annual basis. In our geldings, we also want to make sure that we clean the sheath and the urinary processes on those geldings. This is also a great time to do our vaccinations and dewormings. If you're going to be hauling horses up and down the road, you'll need to get a Coggins or equine infectious anemia test and potentially other required tests. And then use this opportunity with the wellness exam just to consult with your veterinarian to get their opinion and recommendations on things such as first aid, what to do in case you have colic in horses, or what you do in case of pounder, and so on. So that's an important part of the general health management. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and shift gears just a little bit and start talking about nutrition and feeding. And so I want to start off and just mention the different required nutrients we're looking at for the horses, talk a little bit about how we estimate nutrient requirements, which really tells us how much we need to be feeding a horse. We're going to talk a little bit more about body condition score, go about body condition scoring horses, and this is one we did here at NMSU just about a month ago, and put that together. And then last, want to kind of close things out with talking about the values of different feedstuffs or the nutrients available there. So required nutrients for the horse, basically, what does a horse need in its diet? Number one, water, clean, fresh water in adequate amounts. And Any of us that have played sports or thought we were weekend warriors playing pickup basketball or whatever, you know that if your body doesn't have plenty of water, you're going to dehydrate and have muscle cramps and all these other problems. And so our horses as athletes are no different. So number one, plenty of clean, fresh water. Number two there in green is energy in the forms of carbohydrates and fats. So these are things such as sugar, starches, and oils in our diet, in the horse's diet. After that, the next limiting nutrient is going to be protein, and specifically we're looking for a variety of amino acids that come from our hay and grain sources. The next class of nutrients that we need to be concerned about are minerals. And so if you look, I've got the letters in green and red there. It's kind of sources of where we get those things. So when you see the green letters, those are things that we're going to get from our forages and our pastures, feeding our horses. And when you see the red letters, that refers to that red trace mineral salt block in the bottom corner of the slide, because we're going to have to supplement some of those things in some form for the horse to get adequate vitamin and mineral intake. So within our minerals, we've got two subdivisions there, macro and micro minerals. You might hear them called trace minerals as well. So our macro minerals are things like calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sodium, chloride, magnesium, and sulfur. And so you can think about salt, you can think about calcium and phosphorus from milk. Our micro minerals are needed in smaller quantities, and those are things like copper, iodine, iron, selenium, cobalt, manganese, fluorine, and zinc. And so the horse is going to need all of those to some extent. Luckily, a lot of these trace mineral blocks that are out there have these things built into them. And if we're lucky, they may even include some of the vitamins that the horse needs. And there's two main categories on those vitamins. The first one being fat-soluble vitamins such as A, D, E, and K, which they're going to get from forages, green pastures, as well as our supplements. And then our water-soluble vitamins for the horse, vitamin C, and then all the B-complex vitamins that normally, if the horse has a good quality diet, they can make within their own body from the feed they're getting. All right, moving on. Estimating the horse's nutrient requirements. This is where, okay, we need to know what the horse is doing in order to determine how much we need to feed them. So the first thing there we're going to look at is the class or the stage of production. So different classes, we define them as maintenance. And a maintenance horse is just one that's out there in the pasture just hanging out or living in the dry lot. They're not asked to do much of anything. If anything, it's maybe light riding once or twice a week. Our next production class there is growing horses. So these are the growing weanlings, yearlings, horses that we're growing in to be adult using horses. The next category is our performance horses. So those horses that we're either using on the ranch to work cows with, or maybe we've got them in barrel race training, or we're roping on them, rodeoing on them. They're doing some type of consistent work. And then the next category is our lactating brood mares or our milking mares that have a foal side. And so in terms of that class or stage of production, you might ask yourself that question, should I adjust the production to help minimize feed costs? So, you know, just like this year, if we're in a drought year, this may be the year, instead of breeding those mares back, maybe we'll leave those mares open this year just so we don't have to feed them as much to produce a foal. And that's going to depend on your individual operation, but that's how we can utilize that in adjusting these nutrient requirements. The next bullet on here says current and mature body weight. And I know everybody doesn't have scales at their house, and I'm in that category as well. So what I offer is just an easy way to estimate the weight of the horse. And for those of you that can see the slides, it's a simple formula where we can estimate the body weight of the horse in pounds by measuring the heart girth around the barrel of the horse and measuring the horse's body length in inches. And so if we take the heart girth and say that's 74 inches and the body length is maybe 76 inches, we take heart girth times body length and multiply all those and then divide by 330, and that will give you the horse's body weight in pounds. And like I said, that's just a formula based off measurements, but in my experience working with stock horses, that normally gets us within about 40 or 50 pounds of their actual weight. And I'm pretty happy with that for an estimate. Then lastly, in terms of nutrient requirements, we need to know what our nutritional goals are. Are we looking for this horse to maintain his current weight, lose weight, or gain weight? So if the horse is too fat, then we probably want him to lose weight. Again, if the horse is too thin and we can see the backbone and the ribs, then we need to set a plan for them to gain weight, and that's going to take more feed or more nutrients for them to do that. Okay, so I know I want to stay on track as far as time goes. I've got these slides in here for example body condition scoring, and I think I'm probably just going to skip through this so that you can go back and watch that tutorial video that we put together a month or so ago, and that will take you through all the steps on body condition scoring horses. Rules of thumb for feed stuff on horses. These are things that I hope you can take with you and just maybe put in the back of your mind and have at hand when you're thinking about feeding your horses and the diet. But we measure energy in horse diets in megacalories of digestible energy, or 1 million calories of digestible energy. So on this slide, it's shown as an MCal DE. So that's 1 million calories of digestible energy. And so when we look at feedstuffs in general, most of our good quality grass hays are going to be about 1 megacalorie of digestible energy per pound. Alfalfa is going to be just a little higher than that, maybe 1.1, potentially 1.2, but not much more than that. So, you know, if you think about a hay being 1 megacalorie per pound, we look over to the right there, our grains are about 1.5 megacalories per pound. And that's going to be things like your sweet feed or pretty much any commercial bag grain. And so when we start swapping things out, if we start graining horses, we need to realize that that grain is going to provide more energy on a pound per pound basis than the hay. And so we need to consider that in our adjustments. In terms of protein, our legume hays or alfalfa hays here in New Mexico are going to be at least 14 to 16% crude protein. I would say that's a bare minimum. A lot of them are going to be up in that 22 to 24% crude protein range. However, our grass hays are probably going to be in that 7 to 10% crude protein range. So if we fertilize Bermuda grass or fescue, maybe even some orchard grasses, you know, with fertilization and good quality control, we might get them up to 12% crude protein, but not much more than that. If we don't fertilize them, if we don't harvest them right, and don't have very good quality grass hay, it's very easily to get down to 7% crude protein. And so that's something we need to be aware of when we're looking at comparing our different hays and where they fit into the feeding program. In terms of vitamins for the horses, the rule of thumb is that forages are high in vitamins, and that's true. Grains are typically low in vitamins. And so again, if we're swapping out these things, if we're swapping out a lot of forage or green pasture and we start graining horses, then we might want to look at supplementing with vitamins and minerals. So in terms of minerals, our legume hays such as alfalfa are very high in calcium, but our grass hays are only a fair source of calcium. Then all forages are typically low in phosphorus. And so we mentioned earlier that grains are high in phosphorus, but low in calcium, and our hays are an opposite of that. So when we start talking about putting things together, making a diet for a horse, this is where the term balancing comes into play, a balanced diet. We're trying to balance all these different ingredients together to come up with the right nutritional mix. So the last thing I want to leave you with is just some tips for feeding management, because I think, you know, when we go to buying our hay and feeds for feeding a horse, that's the initial expense, and what determines I guess how efficient we are in our feeding program often has to do with how we manage that feeding. And so I always encourage people to get a sense of how much they're feeding by weighing their grain and weighing their hay, and that's what I want to talk about here. So the first bullet point says we need to have plenty of fresh, clean water and salt and mineral out for our horses, and that's a given. That's something we can't negotiate on. Those are things that are essential to the basic health of the horse. Plenty of fresh, clean water and a salt mineral block or supplement mix. Then we want to provide enough good quality forage to meet the horse's requirements. And I've just put those in numbers there. So if we have a 1,100 pound adult horse that's at maintenance level or a light work level, their energy requirements is going to be about 15 to 20 megacalories of digestible energy per day. And you can typically meet that with a good quality grass or alfalfa hay. By feeding about four flakes, about 16 to 20 pounds a day, will meet that requirement. And the nice thing about it, that same type feed stuff is going to meet our crude protein requirement of 550 to 700 grams. And then our calcium, phosphorus there, those are the requirements, 20 to 30 grams calcium, 14 to 18 grams of phosphorus. Depending on what we're feeding, we may be way over that, or we may be slightly under, and we may have to supplement those. And that's why I say that salt mineral package is always good to have to make sure you've got those vitamin minerals taken care of. But when we talk about meeting those requirements for that horse, we need to weigh our hay and grain to determine how much we're feeding or need to feed to meet those requirements. And so I've got the picture of the grocery store scale, the produce scale, where you put your apples and oranges in there and determine how many pounds you're putting in that little plastic bag. Or the picture below that in the right-hand corner is a hanging scale for feed, or you may even sometimes use a fishing scale just to weigh fish with. But I'm not saying you have to go weigh your feed every day, but you need to take the container that you feed with and weigh up the feed you're using and get an idea of how many pounds that is you're feeding. And once you know how much it is, you can visually put in the same amount every day, but at least then you know how much you're feeding each day. And a lot of people will do that with their grain, but I recommend you do it even with your hay. Sometimes that can be a little more challenging, but what I tell people to do is just go buy you a little, they call them stall muck buckets, or maybe it's a laundry bucket from Walmart or their dollar store. But something like that will hold 2 or 3 flakes of the small bale hay you're feeding, and you can get an idea what those flakes are weighing roughly, and at least get some idea of how much hay you're feeding in terms of pounds per day. And the nice thing about this is if you do this and you find out, hey, I'm feeding this horse twice as much hay as he needs, then you can cut back and feed him what he needs so he doesn't get too fat. Or alternatively, you might find out, hey, that one flake is only 4 pounds, and so I need to be feeding him twice as much as I have been. And so that's something to think about as well. And then the last thing, dietary adjustments with your horses. I just recommend that you monitor the body condition score monthly. I don't think you need to try and do it every day or every week, but maybe take a picture with your phone on the first of every month and compare that over the course of 4 to 6 months, and that'll give you an idea if they're gaining weight, losing weight, or staying right where you want them to be. And you can then utilize that to make decisions about adjusting your diet. And any diet changes, I would recommend that you do slowly over about a 10 to 14 day period. So typically what I tell people, when you make a diet change, use 75% of the old diet for the first 3 or 4 days of the change, mixed with 25% of the new diet. And then the next 3 or 4 days of the change, do half the old diet, half of the new diet. And then the next 3 or 4 days of the change, you're going to be doing 25% of the old diet or feed and 75% of the new diet or feed. And that just makes sure that we don't do anything too rapidly to cause digestive upset or colic in our horses. So I know we're wrapping up. I think we got about 10 minutes left for questions. So that's where I wanted to end up here with this yearling foal we've got there with the question mark on his face. So this is a good time for me to shut up and take any questions you have. And again, I want to say thank you for letting me be part of your day. And I hope you got some useful tips out of this, because that's really my goal in these general seminars. So with that said, Jesse, I am done, and you can take over as host, and we'll take any questions we may have. Thank you all.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Turner? If you guys need the presentation, go ahead and email me there, and I could get the presentation sent to you. If you missed something, forgot to write down something, certainly help you out with that. Okay, looks like nothing's coming in. Thank you again, Jason, Dr. Turner. And I'd just like to remind everyone that we do have a Facebook page and YouTube channel. So if you know someone that would benefit, that missed it, go ahead and go to our Facebook page and YouTube channel, New Mexico NAPS 6. Also on our Facebook page, we do have some useful USDA program information and gardening livestock publications, also some how-to videos. We also distribute a monthly newsletter. If you would like to receive our monthly newsletter, email me. And then one last note, we are currently working on constructing a NAPS project website as a central location for all our material to further assist you all in the future. So stay tuned. Again, thank you for joining us. Please continue to be safe, wash your hands, wear your mask, and continue practicing social distancing. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.